All right. Right, so welcome everyone to this PhD support group meeting. This is the Tuesday session of the weekly UKZN Doctoral Academy program. I'm Lenin Liebenberg, and thank you very much for joining us today. To any new participants today, just to let you know, this is a very casual and very supportive space. And we really appreciate and encourage interaction amongst participants and with the speakers. So please feel free and comfortable enough to interact with the speakers and other participants by placing any comments in the chat box or raising your hand or using the reaction icons whenever you feel like expressing yourself, your thoughts in a constructive way. If at times you may prefer to voice an opinion anonymously, that's totally fine. You're welcome to send me a chat message, and I'm happy to read and address that for you anonymously within the session. That's fine as well. Right, so today we'll be discussing a very important topic, something that is so very common, but still so daunting to so many people. And this is the prospect of career transitioning after your PhD. Now, I remember one of the earliest sessions in the PhD support group meeting, way back in the beginning of the year. I ran a poll and I asked you where you see yourself in 10 years' time. And the top responses were things like successful and happy and wealthy and the like. But then the most predominant response related to career or career path was professor. So quite a few of us in this community are following a PhD with the intention of having the outcome be a career in academia, a career in research, teaching, supervision, training within a tertiary education institution. But what if that goal changes for some reason? Perhaps midway during your PhD, you realize that academia might not be for you, and you're curious about where else your PhD might lead you. Or perhaps you've just finished your PhD and you're unable to find a position within academia and are now exploring where else, again, your PhD can take you. Or maybe you pursued a PhD specifically wanting to be more employable and are now at the point where you're interested in making this transition. There are many reasons, and either way, making the move from PhD to an employee, whether within or outside of academia, can be a very scary process for many people. So to discuss this more with us in detail today is Dr. Tadokera, a medical communications professional and a career transition coach. Dr. Tadokera has completed her PhD in clinical TB immunology from the University of Cape Town in 2011, after which did a postdoctoral research in TB, tuberculosis, while acquiring additional training in public health. And then before transitioning to a current role, she worked as a senior scientist and NIH-funded research fellow at Stellenbosch University. Dr. Tadokera she's passionate about science communication. You'll see that when you speak to her now, and also passionate about empowering the next generation of scientists. And Dr. Tadokera, we are so very privileged. We are so very happy to have you join us here today. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to meet with us today. And we look forward to hearing about your journey and learning more about your transition process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lenin. I appreciate the invitation. And yeah, it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon with you. I'm going to see if I can mute my video just to help with the bandwidth. I'll still be here. I can turn it back on later on. Is that okay?
Perfect. I'll do the same as well.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so try to make it smaller. Right. Okay, so yeah, it's really an honor to be here like I said, and I'm very excited to share my journey with me. As you know, somebody once told me that if anybody's favorite topic is talking about themselves. So yeah, it's my honor to be talking about myself and my journey today. And I hope that you'll be able to pick up a nugget or two. And also that by the end of this talk, when I finish, I hope that you'll be able to realize that, well, at least I would have convinced you that actually there's life beyond the professorship or beyond the ivory tower that we all dream of. Right. So there we you have to bear with me. Zoom is not my favorite, so I struggle with it a lot, but it looks like I've got, yeah, the slides are jumping. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk just a little bit about my career journey, my PhD and my career journey. Like I said, I'll give you a bit of historical context of PhDs as I try to make a case or an argument of why I think that the system doesn't work anymore. I'll speak about, well, I'll pose some questions to you, whether you think there's still value in doing a PhD, despite all of what we know about academic jobs being difficult to come by. And then I will conclude by just sharing some thoughts and some actionable steps that I think could help PhDs and even supervisors and mentors to help PhDs and students who, and postdocs who are thinking about moving out of academia. And then I also have a few websites and links on the very last slide of places that you can explore this in a bit more depth. And I'll share that slide with Lenin, or maybe you can even just grab it for yourselves as well. So my very first question is, why did you decide to do a PhD? I'm hoping that you can interact with this slide and just share with me your reasons for doing a PhD. There's no right or wrong answer, but I'm just curious because I want to know. I will tell you about my own reasons later on, but I would want to know just from the people in this house, what were your motivations for doing a PhD? Can everybody see and interact with that slide?
Sorry, yes, we can see it. And I've also put in the chat how you can access it. You could go to pollev.com/Rebecca Tadokera 874. It's listed on the top of the slide. Alternatively, you could text Rebecca Tadokera 874 to the number 37601. I've put that information in the chat box.
Okay, I'm just going to give a minute or so to see if the responses are coming through. There's 21 participants, so I'm expecting 21 responses.
I'll try it as well and test it.
Yeah, let's see. I don't see anything. Do you see any? Did you input anything, Lenin?
I think it's going to be easy for people to respond in the chat, don't you think?
Yeah, yes. I see Adekunle says B. Someone else says C.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of people who said B. It says 100%, but yeah, okay. So to secure a job in academia. So, okay, so yeah, they're coming through. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
you can see it in the chat box.
Oh, is the answers in the chat box as well?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I see people typed in. Some people just typed in the answers. Okay.
Yeah.
E, C, C, B, B, D. Okay, so mainly B and C.
Is it possible to submit multiple answers?
I think so. I didn't lock it to do one response, but yeah, I think these answers that are typed in here, I don't think I can be able to put them in to calculate. So let's see if I don't think I can. Okay, so you have 67%. I don't know how many that is. But anyway, I think to cut a long story short, I'm sure those are just some of the reasons that I think people do PhDs. And there could be more. People might have different reasons from these ones here. But as you can see, so a lot of people did a PhD to secure a job in academia, or because it was the natural step, the natural next step. I mean, that was the next thing to do, right? You've done it in masters, so why waste a master's? You might as well just do a PhD, right? I'll tell you my reasons a little later on, but for me, this is me graduating with my PhD in 2011 at UCT. And I would say that a lot of people think that when you do a PhD, it's almost like they think, oh, you've arrived, you've got a PhD. Wow, it feels like you've achieved. But when I reflect and I look back, I think that was actually the beginning of my journey of self-discovery. It was the beginning of my career journey. And I probably didn't know it yet 10 years ago, but looking back, I definitely think that is only when your career begins your career takes off, or you begin to try to figure out, I'm like, okay, so what do I do with this PhD now, and so for me, I did a PhD because it was the natural step. I think most people say that it was the next thing to do. You've done a master, so yeah, just go ahead and do a PhD. And also the prospects for better employment, because you think that, oh, the PhD, you are a lot more marketable and you can earn a better salary and so on and so forth. For me, an additional reason was just the intellectual stimulation, because when I finished my undergrad, I went into high school teaching, and I taught high schoolers science and maths for a few years. And it was fun, but I just did not feel like I was applying my mind fully. I needed something that was a little bit more academic, well, intellectually stimulating. And that was one of the other reasons why I went on to do a PhD. Right, so coming full circle with the PhD and looking at back, I was just curious as I was thinking through why, I mean, the origins of the PhD, how old is it? And, all of that history that we may not know back in time. And I found out that the PhDs started being issued around in the 12th century. So that's like hundreds of years ago, right? And back then, a PhD was obviously, it was very prestigious. It was very few people. It was for the elite, basically. It was for those people who were wealthy enough that they could just sit there in the Ivory Tower and just be studying and not having to do anything else, or at least the most would be to teach. But beyond that, there were not that many people who were getting PhDs. And I think that things have changed a lot since the 12th century. But in terms of the system that we are in, the academic system itself, I personally think a lot still needs to change. There hasn't been a lot that has changed since the 12th century. And we're still training people like we're training them for professorships and for academic jobs. Yet there are very few jobs compared to the number of PhDs that we are churning out. You see, I'll show you some graphics a bit later on, but we are churning out so many PhDs, so many graduates, yet the number of universities does not keep increasing. The number of jobs in academia does not increase. When somebody gets a tenure appointment, they stay in it for life, basically. So you're looking at very few jobs that are not increasing, yet we have more and more people coming out of the PhD system and who are not quite equipped to know what else is outside, what else is there beyond academia for them. So I would argue that the system is antiquated and it needs to change. It is far surpassed what it was designed for, and it needs serious revamping. And also, for me, one thing I found very interesting is that PhDs are not, I mean, compared to undergraduates and all of the and diplomas, the PhDs are not that many, but I found it quite interesting that I could not find data online or as to how many PhDs are actually trained or where are the PhDs, or even like studies to show where are the PhDs that are being trained, where are they working. It seems like universities are not even keeping track of that. They're not interested, I guess. So I found that a little bit peculiar. I will explain why in a little while. So that's just me making a case of how I think the PhD system is compared to the 12th century. Look at the car that they drove in the 12th century compared to the cars that we have now. But when it comes to the PhDs and the system and the academic system, I think we are still very much there in the 12th century. Right, so in terms of just the number of PhDs, I've said that universities are churning out loads and loads of PhDs. And I stumbled across this graphic. It's in the South African Higher Education Report and Training Report, Education Training Report, Higher Education Training Report. And this is a 2020 report. So that's like a couple of years ago. And what this shows basically is the number of, so the bars there you see are the number of PhDs, well, the number of doctoral degree graduates per million of population every year, right? So what that tells you is that in 2010, there were 28 PhDs per million of population. And I did some quick calculations. And so what that tells me is that in 2010, which is around the time that I graduated, and maybe you too, Lennon, there were slightly under 2,000 PhD holders in the country. And this number is growing, and you can see it's growing. It's on an upward trend. I'm pretty sure now we probably like in the 60s or something. But as of 2017, when they compiled this report, they were like 3,240 PhD holders in the population. So that's 54 per million. And if you approximately 60 million in the country, that gives you about 3,200 PhD holders. And I think the number is probably doubled by now. That's like, 5 years after 2017. So that tells you there's lots and lots of PhDs coming out of the university system. I calculated, and it's at least 200 to 300 every year, or something like that. Right, so it's a lot, but the universities are not really expanding. The number of professorships, I don't think, are increasing. If anything, I think there's fewer and fewer jobs in academia. I don't know if I can move this away. Oh, there. Okay, so this here was an international study that I picked up, and it was just showing, they were trying to just capture the sentiments of PhD holders and postdocs. And it seems like most PhDs, and this was mainly in the US and in the UK, feel free to raise your hand and ask, and Lenin, please keep an eye out for me if anybody has a question.
We will do. Yeah,
thank you. So, yeah, so the first graphic that we have shows, do you see your job prospects as better or worse than previous postdoc generations? And a lot of people feel that the situation has become worse. And I think it stands to reason. Like, there's so many PhDs coming out of the system, but at the same time, the jobs are not really increasing. So people do feel disillusioned. So people are generally disenchanted. And then people were also asked, which sources do you use to seek career guidance and advice? And very interesting that a lot of postdocs get their information from fellow postdocs. And I don't know where those postdocs get it from, but yeah, it's just basically cross-pollination exchange of information. Some students reported that they'll get their information from their supervisors or their PIs or mentors. And then a few others will get it from other sources like Nature Careers and so on and so forth. But for me, what that says is that basically people don't know where to get information from, right? Except asking your friend. And I'm not sure how reliable. Chances are what I know is what my friend knows as well, right? So there's not enough information out there for what students need. And then in terms of just what are the challenges, and I think this is something we already know. If you're in academia, if you're in research, we all know the challenges of trying to secure funding, and there's just not enough jobs in the field. And also just the impact of COVID was cited as one of the repercussions or of the challenges in the career progression. And then an additional question was, what skills do you need? And obviously a lot of students pointed out they would need additional skills to be able to take their career forward in one way or the other. And I found the very last one interesting. It says, would you recommend a career in scientific research to your younger self? And only half said yes. And about a quarter of people say no. And then there's quite a few who say, I don't know. So it would be interesting. I think you can try and slot yourself here to see where would you fit. Chances are some people will say, about half will say yes, they're happy, they're comfortable. But then there's still quite nearly half or slightly more that is not sure or that would not recommend. They feel so disillusioned that they would not recommend that career to their younger selves. But I think that's personal perspective. Okay, so this is postdocs, and I put this here because I felt like, for me, this is how postdoc felt. It felt like you are on this hamster wheel and you are not, I was not going anywhere. It was like a road to nowhere, basically. And I think that I'm speaking for myself. Some people have a fantastic journey and they know exactly that after this postdoc, I'm going to get an appointment and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more certainty. But I think those are very far and in between. For most people, you do a PhD, you go do a postdoc and you don't know what's next. And it's most of the times you're just living from year to year. There's no security of tenure and you are dependent on soft funding. And it's almost like you're sitting on the fence as well. You're not staff, you're not a student. I personally found that kind of frustrating because by the time you get a PhD, you are an adult, right? And it's time to do some serious adulting. You need to pay, you need to buy a car, you need to buy a house, you want to go to the bank to get a mortgage. And a stipend is not a salary. You go to the bank with that and they'll be like, oh yeah, we see you have this chunk of money that comes into your account twice a year, but sorry, we can't really be sure that you'll be getting that money. So we can't give you a bond or we can't give you a car loan, which is frustrating because by the time most people do their PhDs, you're late 20s, you're in your 30s, maybe you even have a family. I had a young family already by that time. So I felt like it was like I was on a hamster wheel. And what that did for me was it led me to a journey of just trying to figure things out and try to find information. And what else, I spent hours in the lab I was in, spent hours on the internet in between experiments trying to figure out, what else can I do with a PhD in immunology? What other jobs could a PhD, could I qualify for? Things like that. I spent a lot of time trying to just figure that out for myself. And there's no surprises for guessing, but there was just no information out there. And that was 2011, remember, about 2012, 2013. And there was just no information on what else one can do with a PhD. And I think to make matters worse, oftentimes, your supervisors don't know any better because all they know is academia. And so they really cannot advise you beyond that. That is even if you're courageous enough to go and speak about it. Because it's not always the most commonly heard conversation in academic circles who are like, oh yeah, you've got a PhD. What do you want to do? You want to go outside, work outside of academia, it's not always received very well. So I embarked on a journey for myself to try and figure out what else I could do with my PhD. And yeah, so where do I go from here? And I'm sure you'd not be surprised that I thought that at that time, I thought, oh, well, the best thing to do for me is just go and get another degree. Let me go study again. Maybe if I get another degree, I think that will be my ticket to getting a job, a secure job out of academia. And so, yeah, I enrolled for well, not an MSc, in MPH actually, for a master's in public health at UCT while I was still postdocing. And I was certain that, oh, well, this is it's going to merge very well. It will work very nicely with my master's in immunology in the public health degree. I think it's going to just work perfectly. And yeah, I'll be sorted. And for a while, I think maybe it worked, because then I was able to get a year or so after graduating, well, towards the end of my master's in public health, I got a job and I worked for the Human Sciences Research Council as a specialist scientist in public health research, which I enjoyed some aspects of it, but then there were also other things that I didn't quite enjoy. And I think also it's just a comparison when you're used to an academic environment and you're thinking, I don't know if I can be with these people. I'm not sure. And so what that did for me was 2 or 3 years later, I found myself going back into academia. And I was so determined this time. I was so determined to get a faculty appointment. And when I got this appointment at Stellenbosch University, it was an NIH-funded fellowship. And I thought, oh, wow, this is the perfect launchpad. I've got 2 years of funding and I'm going to apply for a grant. Well, for grants, I'm going to publish papers. And by the time I finish those 2 years, I'll be sorted. I'll be good to go. I'll have a 10-year appointment. But things don't always work according to plan. It doesn't always work it doesn't go in a straight line like that. And hello, COVID. COVID came around. And for those of you, well, we are all in infectious diseases, but in TB research in particular, a lot of the money was just pulled out and it went into funding COVID work. And that made it very difficult to secure any funding for TB, unless if you decided to pivot into doing COVID work, which I was not particularly interested in. So I found myself coming full circle at a crossroads again. I'm like, okay, fine. So I don't have the funding that I was hoping for. I don't have the tenure or the faculty appointment that I was hoping for. Now what? And so this was at the end of 2021, sometime last year. Then I found myself in this place. But one of the things I think with COVID is there was a lot of misinformation, and I'm sure we would all know we've lived through the pandemic. And I found it very frustrating, just the amount of misinformation that was going on with my immunology background and the public health. I think it just played right into my lap in that sense, that it was like an area that I knew very much about, and I felt like people are just not getting it. And so I started writing and blogging. I had a blog called Science Demystified. It was mainly on Instagram. I haven't been blogging that much on it, but yeah, it was during this time that I then discovered how I feel very passionately about science communication. I had had that all along, and that is one of the reasons why I went to do a master's in public health. But then all of a sudden that was rekindled in me, and I was like, okay, fine. With my passion for communicating science and my knowledge for science, are there any opportunities in this space? And it was during this time that I stumbled across medical writing, which is also called medcoms for short. And medical writing is a new field in South Africa, but it's been around for a long time, especially in the developed countries where the big pharma industry, like in the US and the UK and most of Europe. Medical writing is a big industry because a lot of these pharmaceutical companies do not really have the capacity to employ scientists who can make sense of the clinical data and so on and so forth. And so they employ scientists through medical writing agencies or companies. So yeah, that's how I stumbled across this career path. And it was like, okay, fine, let's see what this is about. So I went on a journey of just trying to educate myself on medical writing, and the process that is required is a very rigorous process for you to actually even get in, because oftentimes you have to go through several writing tests for them to assess whether you are a good fit or not for the role that they want you to be in. And so I went through this process, and eventually I got a role as an associate medical writer, which is like, it's pretty much like starting from the bottom compared to having been a senior scientist in academia. So I'm trying to check if I didn't, okay, I didn't skip, I thought I'd skipped a slide. So with all this that I've told you, I've spoken a lot. I'm just interested in knowing, do you think that if you do a PhD and you do not stay in academia, you have wasted time? Do you think it's a waste of time? I'm just curious to hear what people think. And if you can just add your answers again on that link, or just put them in the chat also, that's also fine. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think?
So we have 1B, we have one, it depends.
Oh, it depends. It's not yes, not no. Okay. Any other thoughts? Let's see if there's any responses here.
It says no, it's not a waste of time. I must say, I'm a very firm believer that it is not a waste of time if you do not stay in academia.
Right.
To me, I think there are so many skills that you develop through your PhD that can be transferable to many other sectors.
100%. 100%. No. I'm curious to hear for somebody who says it depends. Why would you say that? What do you think? It depends on what? There's no right or wrong answer.
Rita, would you like to unmute yourself and just describe?
Hi. So I'm thinking with the PhD, you are looking at quite a specific area of learning or improving knowledge in quite a specific area. So I agree with you, Lenine, that, you know, there's no time, it's not a waste of time because of all the, what's the word, because of all the skills that you will get as you're doing the PhD. But I think maybe if you are, for example, doing something so specific and then you move away and you stay and you move away from academia to do something totally different, that's where maybe my depends is. But I think I agree with you in that the skills that you learn will, at the end of the day, be very useful to you, whether you move away and go to something very, very different other than academia.
Great points then. Thank you. And I see your cousin is also said, yes, the skills are transferable to how I run my personal life and my professional life as well. Yeah, great. So it looks like there's general consensus. Anything else? Sorry, somebody else going to say something.
Yes, sorry. So I had an anonymous message from somebody who was agreeing with Rita, who says that not if you achieve doctorateness. If you get a PhD without acquiring the skills, then you are wasting your time.
Right. If you get a PhD without acquiring the skills, you are wasting your time. And I would also say that, I would add to that to say that if your goal is to get a job in academia and you don't get it, maybe you could consider that, oh, I've wasted my time because now I've got this PhD and it's not getting me to where I need to be. Then maybe you might consider that to be a waste of time in that regard. And somebody says, Elliot says, we need to influence policy and bring about a meaningful change in society. Fantastic. I love that. I love that. But in the big, broader picture, I think that a PhD is not a waste of time. PhD skills, just like Lenin and Rita said, that the skills that you acquire during your PhD are transferable across a variety of fields. Yes, you are working on a specific field, but it's up to you to open up your mind and realize that, you know what, even though I am trying to find, I don't know, I'm trying to think of my research question for PhD, which was 10 years ago. Even though I'm trying to find the importance of this cytokine in TB patients, the methods, the methodology, the approach that I use to figure this out is very applicable to if I was to solve any other problem, even in my personal life or even in business. If you decide to pivot into business, for example, the approach, the way of thinking is very similar. So in that regard, it is not a waste of time. I feel there's tremendous value in doing a PhD. You get numerous transferable skills, which can still be applied in industry. And I would urge you, if you hadn't thought about this, but I would urge you as part of your homework to just try and go list. You realize you have so many transferable skills. Try and figure out what skills, not just the technique, what skills have you gained during the past 2, 3, 4 years of your PhD or whatever, or if you are doing a postdoc during that time, what skills have you gained? You realize that you've picked up a lot of skills, but because sometimes we are just in a space or in a bubble, we don't always see this. Lenin, you have a question?
I think it would be quite interesting if we could put that in the chat box, unless you have something special planned for that.
Perhaps I was hoping to do this word cloud in the next slide. Let me just see.
Oh, okay, good.
I was hoping that we could do word cloud of some sort, but if it doesn't work, we can just throw those in the chat as well. But I was just going to finish off this point in saying that for me, using my personal example of transition to medical communications, like you mentioned, Rita, earlier on, that you are working in a very narrow, in a very specific field. For me, I defined myself for the longest time, for the past 12 years, I'm like, oh yeah, I work in TB research, I'm a TB scientist. And that's how I define myself, because that's how I've always seen myself. But transitioning into an industry, into a different industry, gives you a different perspective, because then all of a sudden I had to work on cancer, on asthma, and on lung diseases, all sorts of different diseases, which I realized that actually I can, even though I've spent 12 years working on TB, it just takes me a month or two to figure out how to do things in this new industry, because the skills are pretty much the same. Right, and they are very universal. So let me see if this word cloud is going to, yeah, this one, yeah. Let's see, there's, no, this is playing up, it's doing this. I think let's just throw in the chat, what skills would you think you have learned during your PhD? You can just put it in the chat. I had another interactive question here, but it's just playing up. I don't think you can type anything in there. Can you? Oh, there, it seems to be working. Nice. Yes,
okay, we've got one critical thinking. Oh, there we go. Some people are putting up,
so I think you can just type it in there. Yes, cool. Oh, this is looking good.
Otherwise, for those who can't access that, please use the chat box as well.
Yes, we're keeping an eye on the chat box as well. Yeah.
I have quite a list over here. I'm just going to keep on going.
You want to go through them?
But I think it's sometimes we don't realize, what sort of skills we have. We take it for granted until we have to step out, or somebody else tells us about it. So I think it's useful to see them and share them within this community and remind ourselves that, we are learning things, we are developing, we are of use to, this PhD should not be let to go to waste. Focus on that doctorateness.
You are right, absolutely. And they keep coming, eh? Networking skill is fantastic. Being organized. There's no way you can plan experiments, analyze data, write it up, write a conference abstract, write a thesis if you're not organized right. You have to be organized. Time management as well. Networking skills, when you go to conferences, when you speak to colleagues, to supervisors, to teammates, that's a lot of networking skills you're going to be needing. Person to person, ability to focus and streamline, even in social life, right? Very cool. I must tell you that for the longest time, my children thought that I did not like watching TV because I never watched TV when I was doing my PhD. I just did not. It just did not fit anyway into my schedule. And so I just didn't watch TV. And they were like, oh, I thought you don't like watching TV. So yeah, streamlining there. Writing, yes, again to writing. And yeah, research. So it's a lot of skills that you are learning with your PhD. So even if you don't end up as an academic, even if you don't end up as a professor, just know that your PhD is still very valuable. It's well worth it. I'm just gonna scroll through to the next. I think I have a couple more slides. Okay, so I'll just go to some practical tips for PhD students. And my advice would be start exploring your interests beyond academia. It's never too early to do that. And then also surround yourself with mentors beyond your supervisors. Like you saw in that graphic I showed you earlier, a lot of people get their advice from their supervisors and mentors who only know about the academic environment, right? So you need to make that circle bigger, find other people that know about careers outside of the academy, and learn to speak industry speak. By this, I mean, familiarize yourself with industry language, with what goes on in industry. And a very specific example I can give you is like I mention this to students or to people that I coach, is like, sometimes we are so used to writing that big, long 12-page CV where you write all the talks you ever gave and all of the conferences you attended and all the grants you applied for, all of that stuff. But when you want to pivot into industry, that is not going to fly. That 12-page CV is not going to fly. Nobody's going to look at it because people are busy in industry. Nobody has time to look at that. So start learning to how things are done in industry, including making sure that you tailor your CV accordingly for the jobs that you want. And another important point that I also mention from time to time is that LinkedIn has democratized the professional networking. So it's so much easier to access people, to speak to people that you don't know, industry leaders, recruiters, etc. Because we have so much easier. It's much easier. So don't just use social networking for entertainment. Use it also to advance your career. Work on your LinkedIn profile. Look at other people's profiles and see how you can improve yours, because that is the world that we're living in, and your LinkedIn profile is pretty much going to be like an advert for you, right? And then in addition to that, also just get involved. Don't just bury your head in your pipettes and in the lab and in your thesis and so on. Do other things, because sometimes we think that you're wasting time. Oh, you're volunteering for that committee, you're wasting time. But actually, you learn a lot of other skills from there. You may never know what you learn. So get involved with those other non-academic activities, because it will enrich your experience, it will enrich your life. And then if you need to, upskill, and only if you need to. I've given you an example of how I went on to do in Masters in Public Health. I completely enjoyed that degree. It was pure fun. I loved it. It was the one degree that I did for fun more than anything else. But in terms of moving my career forward, I don't think it substantially moved it forward. I could have done maybe a few modules that would have helped. Well, it helps that I can add MPH to my qualifications, but just only upskill or do more studying if you need to, because we are so used to studying and work or we think that we should just study and we should get another degree, but that is not always necessary, right? And then what can supervisors and mentors do? I'd say that openly discussing PhD career options beyond academia, and I think seminars like this one are helpful because it just normalizes leaving academia. I think we should get to a place where it's normal, and we shouldn't be scared to go to your supervisor to say, oh, I've got 6 months to finish my PhD, but I'm thinking of looking at careers beyond the PhD. I don't think I want to do a postdoc, you know. That should be a normal conversation that you should be able to have with your students. And support students who choose to opt out of academia, say, including networking, you know, linking up with people in your network and things like that. I think that is a good place to start, because you might not know everything. If you have never left academia, chances are you don't know much else out there. So, but you would know somebody who has left. So introducing your students to people in the industry, I think, is definitely something most supervisors will be able to do. And on an administrative level, I think that advocating for more career development resources for students, I feel like these are not there. I mean, I told you about how 10 years ago, I just Googled to try and find out information because this information was just not there, you know, but I know now there's more information available online, yet I still feel the universities should do more to be able to make that information more accessible for students. Students don't have to stumble across information. It should be there, and you should make it part of your career pathing and your planning to say, okay, fine, this could be a career path I could explore, or that, or that, or that, you know. Then that information should just be there for students to process and do with as they do their PhDs and postdocs. And then lastly, I think that there should not be shaming of students who want to leave, who do not want to stay in academia. I've heard of stories where sometimes students, supervisors refuse to support a student or to look at their thesis, or like, oh yeah, you're going to leave and you're not staying in the lab anymore, so what's the point? You know, you're just wasting my time. I feel that's really wrong on all levels. And then lastly, for universities, this is just me thinking aloud, but I feel like universities could do a better job of just trying to tailor the PhD training and the curriculum to help students, to equip students for the broader world of work beyond the academy, because the truth is less than 20% of students are going to stay in academia. So why not be intentional about equipping them for that world, you know, offer more support, career development services, like including coaching, for example, because sometimes you actually don't know what you want until you speak to somebody and you change your perspective and your mind and your mindset shifts, you know. And I know that in the developed countries in Europe and Switzerland, and where the industry is quite big, the biotech industry is quite big. I know they also have like collaborations and partnerships between industry and academia. I feel that also is another useful approach that universities could start going into or thinking about, at least, to just try and open up spaces for PhDs to be more involved in the economy. Okay, I've said a lot, but if you did not hear anything of what I said in this past 50 minutes, I would say that remember that you are highly skilled. You do not need to box yourself to your area of expertise, your subject matter expertise. You have a lot of skills. that you can use beyond that. If you have not started yet, start exploring your options. What are your options? Even if you think you want to be a professor, still try to figure out what else could you be doing. And then network. I think I cannot overemphasize that. And if you do, or if you wanted to stay in academia, like myself, like I told you, I really thought I was going to get that faculty appointment and get those grants. But if you don't get that, I don't think you should look at yourself as a failure. I feel like it's the system that is broken. It's the system that has failed you, because we are dealing or working with a system that is very old, that is not moved along. So don't consider yourself a failure because you failed to get an appointment, because you did not get a faculty appointment or professorship. And also just don't be afraid to reinvent yourself, to pivot, in a different direction if necessary. And lastly, your career is a journey. It's not a destination. It's going to keep evolving. You're going to keep moving on. And yeah, so there's life beyond the ivory tower. Proof of that. There is life. So if in case you were doubting, there is still life. Just because you don't get a professorship, it doesn't mean that that's the end of it. You can still contribute meaningfully to society and to your other passions, and find a space where you can contribute. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm happy to take questions. We've only got 4 minutes, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Tadokera, for all your for discussing your journey with us and also sharing your input. I think you touched on so many very important concepts for people who are considering a transition to career, or whether it be within or outside of academia. You touched on getting coaching or career advice during your PhD. I think it's also useful in this group to let everyone know that the UKZN Student Support Services team does discuss career development options. So if you'd like to learn more, please contact them as well. But I do have a question for you, Rebecca. So I'm not sure where I heard the term, but I've quite forgotten it now. But this concept of job shadowing careers, it seems to be something that's starting to become popular right now. You might be a PhD student, you're not sure about what sort of career you actually want to pursue. So you send an email to somebody who is doing that potential career, asking for 15-20 minutes of the time just to speak about what they like about the career, what they don't like about it, and see how that resonates with you and what you'd like from your career experience. Do you know what I'm talking about? I know there's a term for it.
It's informational interviews.
Informational interviews. Yeah. Okay. So
informational interviews. So when you job shadow, basically you're going to spend a day in somebody's following them around. That's basically the job shadowing. But this is informational interviews, and I think this is a less time-intensive approach, because then you can quickly figure out, especially when you prepare for it very well. You have a set of questions of what you want to know about this career and what you want to ask. So then, and like I said, people are usually very happy to speak about themselves and their journeys. And so you speak to somebody and find out, you pick up what you want to pick up from about the certain career. And yeah, I think those are very useful. And that is definitely something I used during my last pivot into medical communications, because it was a career I did not know. It was something I didn't know. So I spoke to quite a few people on like, what does this involve? What did you do exactly? How does this differ from, what does the writing that you do differ from what I do as a PhD holder, What's the difference? So figuring out those kind of questions, and informational interviews are very powerful in that regard.
Fantastic. Because, you know, sometimes we know what we don't want, or what we
Yes.
don't like, but what we actually do want or like, or where we should be going, sometimes that's a little unclear. And I thought that concept was wonderful, to be able to sit somebody down and say, please tell me a little bit more about your experiences in here. I'm glad that it's worked for you. Perhaps it could work for more people. I know we're pushing our luck here on time, but are there any, would anyone like to ask a question, post a comment, raise any concerns about their own transition from PhD to a career outside? Yeah. Right.
Anything in the chat? I don't see the chat. Oh, there's chat. There's a chat.
Oh, there it is. And I see Rera's got her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, Lenin. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for such a great talk. It really is very, very useful, and I really agree with you that the university can take it upon themselves to help PhDs realize that there are avenues beyond the PhD, and I think this talk is really one of the ways in which PhDs can become aware of opportunities that are available for them. And we've also got fears of, you know, as I mentioned, that as a PhD, you're doing something quite specific, and you do need people who are outside of your specific field to make you aware, or to help you realize that your skills could be useful in their arena. And I so agree with you that we should be given opportunities, or even look for the opportunities to go outside of your field and see where you can apply yourself, or where you can broaden your horizons beyond the PhD. So really, thank you so much for this talk. It really hit home for me.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you found it useful.
Thanks, Rita. That was lovely feedback. So I've just shared with us in this community, shamelessly sharing an advert. The NRF Science for Society lecture will be having a discussion on employability of South African doctoral graduates. I thought that might be useful for this group. So the meeting is on the 25th of August, 12 o'clock. I think they're fully booked, but you can still live stream them on Facebook. And they'll be speaking specifically about return on investment for both the individual doctoral graduate and also the country, especially in the context of career trajectories and employment, absorptive capacity of different employment sectors, not just within academia, the perceived value and utility of using and pursuing doctoral studies, and also cultivation of innovation and entrepreneurship among doctoral graduates. So we've touched on quite a few of these within this presentation. This is such a hot topic. I know it's very personal to many of us. So I'd encourage everybody to just continue the discussion. And hopefully we can hear a little bit more from Dr. Tadokera, Rebecca, in future sessions about this. I know I'm way over time here. So I guess I just need to close the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all your information with us. I look forward to future discussions with you. This session will be, it is recorded and will be shared with the broader UKZN community. We'll put it up on YouTube. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Next week we'll have, see you offline. Next week we have Lewin Moodley joining us again to discuss effective communication, another important concept to learn, skill to develop throughout your PhD degree. Thank you again for everybody for joining us today. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.